Hey guys, talking about paper 2 here, and we're working on 4.7. So let's get ready to take some notes. What is the paper 2 essay exam in HL English literature? Well, first of all, you can tell from the pie chart, it's worth 25% of your IB English score. So this is one thing that is worth more than any of the other single things we've done. Internal assessment was in 11th grade, that was 20%. Higher level essay we did first semester, that was 20%. Now we have the paper 2 essay coming up in May, it's worth 25%. And what happens is you'll get 4 very general questions, and you get to answer one of the 4. You pick one of the 4 to answer. And you'll be expected to answer this question in an essay under exam conditions. You won't be able to have your books with you. You won't be able to use any secondary sources or electronics. And you'll be handwriting the essay at House of Hope Church. You'll have a little over 2 hours to do that. You're going to be expected to compare and contrast 2 works. Now, I am thinking that you're going to want to compare and contrast Men We Reaped and Sag Harbor. Sag Harbor is the book we're going to read next. You could potentially write about 2 other works, or one of those and another work, if you wanted to. If you studied that work in higher level English, and if you did not use it for either your internal assessment last year or your higher level essay first semester. You're also going to be expected to include detailed references to each work. And so that's why I've been making you include specific details in all of your responses and giving you should-dos that include really specific questions. It's going to help you prepare for writing this essay exam in May. And they don't expect you to have a lot of quotations in this essay, because you would have to memorize those quotations if you wanted to use them in May, since you will not have the book with you. So keep that in mind as you're writing this essay. Any quote that you include should be short enough that you could memorize it, and you really don't have to have quotations in the essay. There are 4 criteria, just like the higher level essay, and they're going to sound just like the higher level essay, although they're weighted differently. We have A, knowledge, understanding, and interpretation, which has 10 marks. B, analysis and evaluation, which is another 10 marks. C, focus and organization, 5 marks. And D, language, 5 marks. And so A and B are each worth twice as much as C and D. And for that reason, we're going to be spending most of our time on A and B. And for this first practice try at a paper 2, I'm only going to be grading A and B. All right, let's talk about a good brainstorming strategy for paper 2. This is one that I've come up with that is helpful to people and that I want you to actually use when you get your exam in May. It has an acronym that is easy to remember because it might be something you're thinking when you get the test. DRAT. D stands for define. Define any word in the question you choose to answer whose meaning is tricky to understand or somewhat ambiguous. It's okay for you to have a different understanding of a word than the person next to you, but you want to be specific with your understanding and your definition of that word. And so you'll want to stick with that throughout your essay. R is for rewrite. The idea is to rewrite the question in more simple language or language that includes the definitions that you included in number 1, or maybe just to focus on the particular subject of the question to force you to really narrow in, hone in on exactly what the question is asking you to do. This is the hardest part about this essay, is responding to the question that's being asked. Because we all have kind of an idea in our heads of what we might want to write about after we read a book and prepare for an essay. But with this exam, you have to respond to the question that's being asked. And it can be a little bit tricky. And so that's why number 2 is so important. Okay, number 3 is apply. And for apply, you want to apply what you've learned about the work to this particular question. What themes have we been following? What literary aspects have we traced? How might you use those to answer this question? 4, finally, is to tick off any good idea you have to respond to the question. And I usually recommend that you try to find 10 different things that you could just tick off. Maybe you're not going to use all of those things in your essay. Maybe you will. And then once you've got your 10 things listed, you can start looking at which ones work better than others. You can look at grouping some of them together. You can decide in what order to put these items. And then you'll formulate your thesis statement and start looking at outlining this bad boy. Let's take a look at a sample draft. Here is the prompt. How does the work you have studied portray the struggle to be understood? So the D in DRAT is define. And the words that I think need defining here are the struggle and to be understood. And I'm thinking about what the struggle means. It means a fight or effort. And in this book, Men We Reaped, it's just the telling of the story, I think, that was such a struggle for the storyteller, for Ward. To be understood, I think, in the context of this book really means to be heard, to be listened to as a marginalized person, and maybe also to be understood has to do with her understanding her own story and therefore being able to tell it. The next step is rewrite. So I might rewrite this question like this. How does the book Men We Reaped portray the struggle, the fight, and the effort Ward undertakes to be understood and to be heard as a marginalized person by the dominant society? The key subject here, what I'm really going to focus on, is the struggle to be understood. And as I'm writing the essay, I'm going to have that subject in my mind constantly. I'm going to write it across the top of the sheet of my paper, and I'm going to keep coming back to that over and over and over. And when I start to get away from that subject, I'm going to make sure I reread it and ask myself, am I answering a question about the struggle to be understood? All right, then when I start looking at apply, I'm going to be thinking about the themes and the literary aspects that we've been working with. And I think probably the second one is most obviously involved here, the narrative as a quest for understanding. For Ward, it was writing the book that was the impetus, or rather trying to understand the story of her life, of the trauma of her life, was the impetus for writing the book. And so she uses the narrative as a quest for understanding. But of course, the telling of that story to the reader then implies that it is also a quest for understanding from us, the reader. That if we read her narrative and follow this story, we might understand better why her and her community have been dealt the hand they've been dealt. I think maybe also, the collective over the individual is important because it is the community's story that she's telling, not just hers. And then also coming of age in the margins is important too, maybe not as much the coming of age part in this question, but the margins part. The fact that she is trying to get her story as a Black woman to a dominant society heard, and she's trying to get that dominant society to listen. Literary aspects, the ghost specter motif, storm motif, silence versus speech motif, the characterization of the 5 men, the description of the setting, evocation of mood, and the structure of the 2 opposite moving timelines all could potentially come into play here. So now I've got my rewritten version of this question here. How does the book Men We Reaped portray the struggle, the fight, and the effort Ward undertakes to be understood and to be heard as a marginalized person by the dominant society? And I'm going to start ticking off all of the potential things I could write about. That's what the T is. Maybe just, talking about her reasoning in the prologue for writing the book comes into play, as she says that she's writing it to understand why she is left with this rotten effing story. And she learns by the end it's at least because she's been indoctrinated to believe that she's nothing. And maybe through the telling of her story, she can start to change that. She tells her story by using two opposite moving timelines that converge in the second to last chapter, because it's not just her story, but her community's story and the stories of the 5 men who died and those who they left behind that she wants to understand and that she wants the reader to also understand. She uses a ghost motif to help us understand how the living feel haunted from the trauma of the violent deaths of their close male loved ones. She uses the storm motif to help us understand how living as a Black person in Mississippi is like trying to survive a constant hurricane. She uses the silence versus speech motif to show how hard it is to be heard, much less understood, in a world where you are silenced because of your race. She uses the characterization of the 5 men who are three-dimensional and who defy stereotypes to help us, the reader, understand that they didn't deserve to have their lives cut short. They're not at fault for anything. Instead, they are the victims. And finally, she uses the description of DeLille as both home and a wolf of destruction to show the inexorable pull it has on her and her community, despite the trauma there and the lack of opportunity. So those are all some potential things I could write about. Now, I don't think I could write about all of them. That's way too much for being able to write in 45 minutes. So I need to narrow this down. And for me, I really like the ghost motif and the storm motif because I think they're sort of, they're nice, simple sort of analogies for the experience of living in DeLille as a Black person. And so I think that gets at the heart of the struggle to write this book so that readers understand the story. Okay, so the next question is, how do I write a thesis statement for a paper 2 essay? Well, you want to have these 3 things included. You want to have some language from the prompt, and maybe whatever that subject is that you focused on in the R of DRAT, include that in your thesis statement to make sure that you're focusing on answering the question. And then you want to make sure, too, that you have a debatable assertion, that you're making some kind of argument that's interesting and that needs to be argued. It's not so simple that it's obvious, and that thinking about it in and of itself sort of leaves you with a profound feeling because it's that deep, it's that sophisticated, it's that interesting. And then finally, you need to get literary aspects in there. No, you don't get to forget the literary aspects. We do have to get those in there. And you can have just one in your essay. You'll notice in my thesis statement, I have more than one. Here's my thesis statement. Ward uses a ghost and hurricane motif to show the struggle to be understood as a marginalized person surviving the effects of racial oppression in the book Men We Reaped. So do I have my 3 pieces here? Let's see. I've got aspects of language or literary aspects with ghost and hurricane motif. I have language from the prompt when I say the struggle to be understood, right? And then I have a interesting debatable assertion when I say, as a marginalized person surviving the effects of racial oppression. Okay, so I do think I have all three aspects there, and that this thesis statement would work. Now, can I write a good essay in 45 minutes about both motifs? I don't know. I think when I start planning out my essay, it'll be clear if that's too much and maybe I need to just focus on one motif. Okay, how do we write this practice version? Well, for this practice version, I'm going to give you 2 prompts, and they're going to be in Schoology. They're in there right now if you want to take a look, and you're going to pick one. You get to pick. I'm not going to pick for you this time. This time you get to pick the prompt. And then you're going to prepare for the 45-minute exam by filling out your packet, making sure you do the must-dos, and then hopefully doing the should-dos, and if you've got time, do the aspire-to-dos. Of course, we are handwriting this in blue or black ink on loose leaf paper in class on the test day. And so you have to prepare for that. Always keep that in mind. You can use your book and your packet, but you can't use your Chromebook or your phone or anything electronic. It's going to be worth 100 summative points. And, oh, one other thing I should tell you about your packet. I would like you to leave your packet. Oh, no, excuse me. Your packet is due at the end of the hour on the exam day. Okay. It's worth 100 summative points, and I'm only going to grade it on criteria A and B this time around. Well, what are A and B all about? They're all about this stuff. It's the same as the higher level essay. It's about finding those literary aspects or authorial choices, DITs, remember, diction, imagery, tone, structure, atmosphere, those motifs and structural patterns that you've been tracing throughout the book, and looking at how those create thoughts and feelings in the reader and to what end. So what? How do we get meaning there? So the interpret piece is up right now, and that really has to do with letter A. Letter B is the analyze and the evaluate piece, which is down here. And so I think of this as being kind of the first thing we do when we start tackling these, even though letter B, of course, comes after letter A in the assessment criteria. So that's why it seems a little out of order here. All right, let's take a closer look. Criterion A, knowledge, understanding, and interpretation. This is exactly the same, you guys, as the higher level essay, isn't it? But it's worth 10 marks this time instead of 5. How much knowledge and understanding of the works does the candidate show? In this case, you're going to want to deal with the beginning, the middle, and the end of the book in order to show that knowledge and understanding. And you're going to want to show those specific details, proper nouns, precise textual information that show that you have a good understanding. Use the questions in the packet to help you, even if you didn't answer them. It's got all kinds of good specific details in there that you can use. You're also going to want to make sure that you deal with the prompt, the question that's being asked of you, make a valid claim about it, and include that theme, a rich idea, in your thesis statement and then in your argument throughout your essay. And of course, you're going to be using textual evidence and hopefully the best textual evidence as you write your essay. All right, letter B is analysis and evaluation. Again, it's the same as the higher level essay, but 10 marks this time. To what extent does the candidate analyze and evaluate how the choices of language, technique, and style and or broader authorial choices shape meaning? This is all about the literary aspects, right? Looking at maybe the motifs, which deal with imagery and diction, maybe looking at the structure, maybe looking at the atmosphere, which is the setting that we talked about a lot in the book. But this stuff, those literary aspects and how those aspects create certain thoughts and feelings in you as a reader. All right, so good luck to you as you start planning this out for the mastery check for this lesson. I would like to see a thesis statement for each prompt, or I guess for at least one of the 2 prompts. All right, let me know how I can help you. That's what I'm here for.